welcome to this month's Caltech CTME Elevated. I'm your host, Nicholas Beaudoin. I'm the Director of AI Programs here at Caltech Center for Technology and Management Education. I'm very excited to bring one of our star partners into the room, Dr. Cyrus Ashayeri, who's going to talk about his experience within the industry. But if you're new to the podcast, Caltech's Elevated is your monthly infusion of project management wisdom, and is a collective community of where different project managers and leaders talk about the different areas of professional growth, technical management, really where we're trying to, dare I say, elevate our own experiences by sharing that of industry experts. And really, this is for project managers, this is for engineers, this is for Scrum and industry leaders, but it's not specific to one industry. We're covering topics from DevOps, AI, various Agile and Scrum methodologies, data science, digital transformation. So the people that we bring in are really a tribute to all of those different qualities that we look for in Elevated. Here at Caltech Center for Technology and Management Education, we customize various unique learning experiences for organization and individual people as well. We work with one-on-one leadership. We design and deliver different professional programs around the world. So I'm really excited right now to introduce Dr. Cyrus Ashayeri. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Nick. Thank you so much for the introduction, and also I appreciate the invitation and having me on this podcast series.
Great. So Cyrus is a product owner at Beyond Limits AI, which really has a storied history as this kind of birth child between Caltech and NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. Cyrus, before we jump into your background, can you give just a little bit of overview of Beyond Limits AI, where you're currently doing research and developing products?
Sure. Yannick, so as you mentioned, our company started actually more than 8 years ago as a spin-off of a JPL. Our core engineering team that started the company worked on one of the Mars rover programs with JPL, and we do have ties with Caltech. Both our CEO and CTO, and the initial promise was to commercialize and scale some of the AI and autonomous systems that was used in space programs in other industries, for example, manufacturing sector, energy sector, and that's how the company started. And then early on, we had a strategic partner and investor from one of the major international energy and oil and gas companies. And that's why I joined the company, because my background was petroleum engineering, oil and gas, and also I knew a little data science. So we started translating petroleum engineering and energy problems into a data science framework.
Excellent. Now, I've been to one of your main offices in Glendale, right next to Caltech campus in Pasadena, and I was absolutely floored by kind of the standard of excellence that was just around the office. You got engineers, you had AI experts, but not only that, you had really cool replicas of Mars Perseverance rover, various types of products, and IoT sensor-based things that you've done. Is that normal for Beyond Limits AI to undertake those types of projects?
So a lot of what we display in the office is to showcase the heritage and the history of the technology that we use. And that replica is, I think, actually 1/3 or 1/4 model. And most of our guests, like you, like it, take pictures with it. But we still do have engagements with Caltech and work on these projects. I'm not sure if you're actively working on any NASA-related projects now, but from time to time, we do have research associated with these type of activities. Yeah.
Very cool. Now, I probably jumped the gun a little bit, but let me give you a second to share with our audience your background, your PhD from USC, and kind of how you got to this portion of the career that you're in right now.
Sure. Yeah. So in the program introduction, you mentioned that some of the focus and main themes have to do with project management, Agile, Scrum. I don't have any of that. I was not trained to be a TPM, and I was kind of thrown at project management, product management. As you mentioned, my background is in petroleum engineering. I have a master's in petroleum engineering, geoscience technologies, and then PhD in petroleum engineering. My thesis, I was uh, using machine learning data science, and was kind of forced into it because at some point the data set that I was using became such an enormous data set that my PhD advisor said that the spreadsheet's not going to work from now on. You have to go learn this. So back then, R was a more dominant language. So I took a class on R and just started using a little R Studio, and then built a dashboard with like the R Shiny app. So that was my background. But before that, I did work in construction management. I did an internship for a national oil company. I was actually an intern in a Washington D.C. think tank for their energy national security division. I was also research project manager for one of the major IOC's research lab at USC, their smart oil field program. So a little bit of everything. uh, might sound a little distracted or all over the place, but it was a good learning experience for me.
I I love your background, and we've had a lot of conversations in the past as our work has intermingled on campus and through Beyond Limits. But one thing that really struck me was your ability to tie in both the technical leadership as well as strategic. I was looking through your resume, and what really struck out to me was your time at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., where you focused on sustainable energy policies. What brought you from this hands-on technicality at USC all the way up to Washington, D.C. to start talking about policy?
So when I was a student, that was an internship and was a PhD student. My PhD advisor was a former CTO of Chevron, and he did have a lot of connections with the non-oil and gas institutions that are involved in the long-term policy making for energy initiatives. And he recognized that I do have interest and also have some like non-technical knowledge, and he suggested I do an internship there. So I applied, and I spent like 3 4 months there, and I started with looking into energy security initiatives for Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN or ASEAN countries. And then other projects I was involved in had to do, for example, for government commission uh, nuclear safety, and then nuclear reactors future in the U.S. because back then there was concern that a lot of nuclear reactors have early retirements and their share in the energy pie chart or the power base load is going to decline. And then you start looking to some of the Middle East energy trends in terms of like long-term energy and also emissions. So it was a very good experience. And like you mentioned, engineering students or engineering experts do have non-technical expertise that can help with policy making, but there are very rare occasions that they get hired or they consider roles in these type of interdisciplinary environments. So I'm glad that I had that opportunity and had an additional vantage point into what can be done. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very rare that you see kind of that dichotomy between technical leadership, policy, strategic leadership. We tend to get siloed in our own individual teams. Speaking of teams specifically, when you're leading these, kind of talking about Asian region, you're talking about Middle East. I know Beyond Limits AI spends a lot of investment into helping with AI strategies of different countries around the world. How do you deal with working with international teams? How do you deal with time zones? How do you deal with certain customs and social regularities?
Yeah. So when you talk about international teams, and we do have offices in the Middle East and also in Asia, and time zone right off the bat is the first concern, which is like a fact of the matter. It will be exhaustive after a long time when you have to deal with multiple time zones. But then, as a project manager or a product owner or a hybrid role of these two, you have to know about these things. For example, it's not only about time zone, but like calendars that have different national holidays, and also the pace of how they like see things, like uh, the timely fashion of a project, maybe on a day-to-day resolution for some culture or some region, and on a weekly basis for some other region. And then there's a language barrier maybe sometimes, cultural barriers, but I think in broader terms, some of these do translate into quantified metrics like deliverables or success criteria, because accuracy in terms of error margin or success for managers from different countries, from different regions, or even different disciplines have different meanings. Sometimes uh, we deal with projects that the risk factor associated with them because of the nature of the industry are way more important than an error margin. So a data scientist may always frame their success or progress in terms of like reducing error margins or uncertainty quantification, but then a project manager in another country that is dealing with infrastructure or national security sensitive data sets, they prefer having more visibility into the causal inference or the causality of these models or the transparency of these models. So these cultural differences or regional differences do translate into things that the project manager should be aware of and plan in their actions. Another thing that we discussed the other week, we were talking about this, is the international aspect of data privacy laws. So you do have like more sector oriented uh, data sensitivity in this country, like healthcare, FDAs, and all that. But then other countries have either regional, like the EU zone, or nationwide standards, and they're way more strict. I mean, like I think EU zone, they have the AI Act, and sometimes you're working with outsourced engineers, or you do have client engineers or developers as part of your team. So the same data set that people in the US can touch and manipulate may not be feasible for someone in Germany or in China. So as a project manager, this is a risk that you have to be educated about and then be considerate when you're allocating tasks or in terms of expectations, because right down the road, you might actually have legal issues regarding that.
Yeah, and you mentioned EU, EU AI Act having parts of it taken effect recently, but a lot of it taking effect in February, specifically AI literacy under paragraph 4 of the EU AI Act. A shameless plug for Caltech CTME programs. We have a AI literacy course coming out early in the next year for a lot of the compliance for European companies. But we've seen that a lot of products. Ray-Bans, Meta glasses, a lot of the new Siri releases that were released last week from Apple not being able to go out to Europe. Have you in your projects ever come across something where say, hey, I've hit strict GDPR regulations because my data is flowing through Europe? Or maybe do you have any foresight in how the AI Act in Europe is going to affect future AI flows?
So for us, I mean, for energy sector, safety is a big issue, and a lot of the data, the inputs into these models have to come from cameras. Which factory floor or a drill rig operation safety, all of these have to go through computer vision. So these computer vision and what you see and what you can record are subject to these laws. So we have to be careful about that. We've had healthcare projects in the past, and a lot of it, we work with companies that collect data in India. They have kind of looser restrictions in terms of like what they can collect and share, but still you have to be abiding by multiple laws, because no matter where you train your model, when you want to apply these models to a new country, you still have to know the regulatory ecosystem there as well. So it is a challenge. And in our company, I mean, we're not a startup now, but when we started a few years ago, we were a smaller company. We didn't have a systematic way of like, let's say now we're starting to sell to Italy or France, and these are the set of regulations. We didn't have a systematic way of approaching this. So I think that a product manager or a project manager should not always expect to like be provided with a full description, list of checklists and do's and don'ts. And you have to be self-initiated in terms of doing research, keeping up to date, and uh, build your own guidelines. And you can actually educate the other people in your team, because this is a very dynamic environment and like changes come like every other month. So
Are there any differences that you see when leading international teams from a project management standpoint in the KPIs and the success metrics? So say, for example, maybe a success metric. You had alluded to a data scientist being more caring about, say, the accuracy of the predictions they're making, or maybe somebody in Europe cares more about the inference on how fast it is for the user, whereas somebody in Singapore might care about, hey, what is the presentation in PowerPoint look for the stakeholder? How do you manage as a project manager all those different types of expectations for success?
So Nick, yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of the companies we deal with are the same client that you and I have a couple of projects with, one of the largest companies in the world. They have all the resources you can imagine. So they have the advantage of hiring the top consulting firms, the big fours or the big fives or whatever they are. And these companies have the nicest templates and the nicest way of presenting their results. And a lot of stakeholders within these large companies are used to that. So even if your data science team or if your AI tools have really good accuracy and are doing the function that they're expected to deliver, but still you're not presenting your results in the fashion that these stakeholders are used to, your results may not be perceived as well as you expect. So that's one angle of it. The other thing is that aside from the results of your particular project, you may be working on like a time series tool that is making better forecasts in the future. But the big picture uh, manager that is writing the check for your project has a few other tasks upstream or downstream, and the results of your model are going to solve a set of other set of problems down the line. So you do need to understand the client's pain and why they hired you in the big picture. And I'm not talking about like the architecture or the data, but the actual industrial pain point. And I think one way to be able to understand this is when I interact with typical project managers, one of their biggest concerns is a timely delivery of the product. So a lot of their engagement is like just shifting these issues or epics uh, to in progress or to done on your Jira board. And that is a very important thing, but let's, for the sake of the conversation, remove the temporal component for a second and say that for this milestone that you have 2 sprints, you're going to have 1 year and you don't have any time constraints. What are you going to do? If I have that advantage, I'll make sure that every single person in my team fully understands the client's pain and they know what needs to happen. What is this AI model going to do for the big picture? They also know the shortcomings of our own team and they can help each other. So once your entire team understands the big picture of the problem, they will be able to deliver not only the ML results, but also a solution that helps the client see value in terms of resolving their bigger picture problem.
When you are getting your team, say you have a data scientist, an AI engineer, DevOps, whatever it might be, would you involve those individuals during stakeholder interviews at the very beginning of a project?
So unfortunately, are you talking about the project managers?
Yeah, say you're a project manager leading a project, you're trying to gather requirements, maybe look at the technical or the functional specifications and get those mapped out. Do you have technical folks on your team join those, or as a technical project manager, are you holding the reins to that conversation?
So unfortunately, we have not been as active in terms of like engaging our TPMs early on in the commercial engagements. A lot of our projects are started and decided and scoped through our sales or technical sales, and then probably the TPM is looking at the scope and the deliverables once everything is signed off, which is not a good practice. I don't know how to resolve this because sometimes things, especially dealing with bigger companies, large companies, happen like a top down, and someone up there decides that these need to happen, and they do have a scope in mind. So even if you do engage your product people or project people early on, they might not have a lot of say in changing the scope of the work early on. But then you start the project, and I know that in Scrum or these agile project management, iterations and making incremental changes is one of the key fundamental concepts. But then it's just not about like tweaking features. Sometimes you have to redo or undo things that either other teams within your organization have done, or things that people in your client's organization have done. You may go and say you have to undo what you spent 3 years and whatever number of $1 million within your team. So if you bring in people that have product expertise and also have a architecture expertise in terms of like seeing where your solution is going to fit in the bigger picture, it may reduce some of these pains in terms of like redoing or undoing tens of things down the road.
In some of that reminds me, in some of the partnerships we have, specifically, I'm thinking our 1 month long AI Academy that we do in partnership with both Caltech CTME on campus and over at Beyond Limits AI for one of the world's largest companies. Your team spends a tremendous amount of time instructing, I'd say, intermediate level data scientists and AI engineers in how to design products. Can you talk a little bit about the process and touch on the difference between project manager and product owner?
Sure. So, in terms of the AI Academy that both you and I work on, I mean, you've been in the process of devising these 4-week programs, and you see how many versions we do. Sometimes we do like 12 versions of like what modules need to be there, the order of trainings, and then where to place your capstone projects. So it's a process that at the end of the day serves the satisfaction of the client. So nothing against it, but there are probably ways of maybe automating this or making it more sophisticated. So hopefully we'll get there down the road.
Well, you're dealing with human schedules. I mean, I can't recall how many near midnight calls we've been on around the world together where we're on version 85, and you think you have all those puzzle pieces together, and be it an instructor or a professor has to change a day, or we have to tweak one thing and it throws the whole thing out the window. It's like a game of musical chairs.
Yeah, so it's a big challenge. And then you ask about like, does this fall under a product or a project manager? And I know that a lot of these big companies have different definitions for this. Like you see job titles as AI ML project manager, and they have their own definition. You have TPMs, technical program managers or project managers. And then sometimes you have like AI solutions managers. A lot of them have overlap in terms of their functions and definitions, and there are certain tasks that coordination. All of these have to deal with that. Risk management, like someone gets sick, someone's not available. Risk management aspect of it is common characteristic of all these different personas or jobs. Communication, I think, probably is the most important characteristic of all these different job titles, whatever you want to name them. So I think right now with AI projects and having more interdisciplinary team and international teams, a project manager of the future has to be equipped with some of these other techniques or capabilities that are not in the classical definition of a project manager. Maybe in 5 years from now, you have a juggernaut of a project manager that knows AI, also knows a lot about like data privacy laws, and knows a lot about cultural nuances. So you might have an evolution of project managers. And then you talked about like the human component of this. You're dealing with human instructors. Like every time you read about AI, the concern about like AI replacing people's jobs. I don't think these project management job can be replaced because there's so many details in terms of like day-to-day plannings, and also knowing each individual's strengths and weaknesses, that you cannot replace this with a framework or a software or planning software or like a agile formula. Because I mean, some people in your audience are probably project managers or product owners or product managers. if I ask you to take a minute and think about the sweetest highlight of your past 3 years or 5 years, are you going to think about a framework? You say like, I applied this Scrum framework and it made things easier, or is it going to be an individual, someone's idea, your own creativity? Uh, my highlights or my better experiences in terms of project manager, all this goes back to people. Either someone came up with an idea or someone was able to bring in a tool that they developed in the past, but it wasn't because I knew Scrum or I knew how to make better use of Confluence software. So the human component of it, I think, is key to success, and that cannot be easily replaced with an AI agent, I think.
What now you've alluded to different skills that you pick up. What's a skill that you've had to pick up during your career leading AI related projects?
The skill I had to pick up, Nick, because early on I disclosed that I was never trained to be a project manager. I don't have all of these Sigma belts and stuff. What I had to do was to trick people that work in my teams to think that the solutions were their ideas and they started
Hmm.
championing that. So I went to people with my problems and shared it with them, and they came up with the idea and they liked their own idea, and they pioneered it and pushed everyone else to make that happen. So I think that was my best skill.
So not only managing down and up, but you had to manage horizontally well at the same time.
Yeah,
Oh, that's fantastic. Let's move away from talking about frameworks and project management, and let's talk about some really cool stuff. So, you spend a lot of time at Caltech Center for Autonomous Systems and Technology, the CAS Lab. And yeah, I don't want to steal your thunder, but can you talk about the Indy project a little bit and kind of tell our audience all the cool things that are happening with autonomous race cars?
sure, of course. So again, I was fortunate enough to be thrown at this project as a project manager, and it's a big project. It's everything that you have in the title of your podcast today. It's interdisciplinary, it's international, and it's a very scientific and technical challenge. It's an autonomous Indy race, like for those who are familiar with the Indy car racing. These are the car is similar to an F2 car, a little smaller and less powerful than Formula One cars. But then this is fully autonomous, no human in the loop. So once these cars pass the 40 miles per hour threshold, the human operator cannot intervene in their control. So they have to use sensors like LiDAR, radar, GPS, cameras to navigate and avoid clashing into walls or other cars and achieve a full lap, and then compete for a top speed. And then right now in the current format, there's a controlled overtaking competition that two teams are on the track, and at a certain segment of the track, they're allowed to overtake the defender car. Um, this has been going on for the past 3, 4 years. At this stage, it's a university competition. So you have universities from South Korea, from Italy, Europe, uh, Germany, and a few US universities. And I think this goes back to maybe 2 decades ago as a DARPA initiative. But right now, in its current format, are race cars. Uh, in terms of technology, all cars are exactly the same body, the same engine, and in terms of computation, they all have the same CPU, very limited computation power, and all the sensors are exactly the same. So the competition boils down to your algorithms and how efficient you're in processing these data and making real-time decisions at the extreme edge. There are no cloud communications. There's no training on the edge. So, uh,
How fast are we talking about in decisions? Like, how fast are these cars going?
so Nick, I was in Indianapolis in September, and the team that won that race was at 117 miles per hour. Yeah,
So those are so
it's wild.
you're not making a call to Google Cloud or AWS via API. That's all happening on-prem, right?
Yeah, I think these cars travel close to 90 yards within a second. So by the time that your human operator knows something's happening, this car has either crashed, and these cars cost like $500,000. Yeah. So this is an extreme edge. And then our sponsor for this project is an energy company, and their motivation for this project, I mean, aside from the obvious PR aspects of it, is to bring in this lessons learned, and the autonomous technology stack or these edge AI algorithms into their actual industrial problems. Let's say it's a manufacturing plant or remote operations in offshore or safety emergency response. So that's a promise. Like test these technologies at a very extreme edge and then bring them into actual different domain industrial problems.
And what role does, say, someone, a project manager or product owner, how technologically up to date do they need to be able to lead a project like this? Like, obviously, you have a PhD in this area, you have an immense wealth of experience in project and product ownership. But if somebody is looking to say, hey, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, I want to be like Cyrus. What are some steps that they can take? Maybe they come from a technical background or vice versa. They come from a project management, PMP, Agile, Scrum background, and they want to learn those technical tools to lead those projects.
Yeah. So when we started this project, there was a huge robotics component to it, and I didn't really know a lot about it. So the first few weeks, I was actually forced to download a lot of research papers, textbooks, and educate myself about it. And the thing is, I don't think I need to know everything, or a project manager needs to know everything. I think you need to know where to find what anytime. So if there's a question, you have to be able to go and find reliable sources and examples of implementation in the past. And the thing is, you don't really need to reinvent things. A lot of the work we are doing are considered AI, and they have these sophisticated algorithmic names. But as a technical person, I think you need to be able to solve the problem on a high level without any AI lens. Solve the physical problem, solve the process problem, solve the operational problem, and then see if AI can make it faster, make it cheaper, or make it more scalable. Otherwise, if you start right off the bat, say, I have this data set and let me feed it to my neural nets or gradient boost or whatever, it's not going to work. So I think you have to have a systems thinking. You have to have some understanding of the physics or the processes that these things are happening, and then maybe somewhere you are trying to make things more efficient, you bring in some ML or AI.
That's a really good answer. Thanks. You have to take notes during that. All right, so we have a couple questions, and for those of you who are on the call, feel free to type in your questions, and I can ask them to Cyrus. But the first question that I have here is that sales and pre-sales are running ahead essentially to close the deal. And this is something we see across industry. Is sales has a goal, they have targets, they have quotas, and they might, I don't know, I'm not going to say fudge, but they're going to not be as careful with the requirements to make that sale. How do you deal with that when those requirements, those technical functional requirements, come on down to a technical team? Are you able to push back? What's the life cycle of those requirements that's get granted by somebody else?
Sure. So, I mean, by nature, I think sales needs to exaggerate a little in terms of like your capabilities. You read a lot of articles about like why data science projects fail, and overpromise of AI is a common theme. And I don't know if it's sales tactic, it's a marketing thing, but it's out there and everyone does it. So you start the project, scoping of the project with a higher than usual anticipation on your client side. So I think one way to reduce this risk is to engage client side people in the project. And I'm not talking about stakeholders, I'm talking about like an engineer or an SME or a developer. So let's say you have a team of 10 people. Let's have a front-end engineer, or if it's an oil and gas project, a reservoir engineer that doesn't even know AI as part of your team. So they can become a resident, come to your offices, stay with you for 6 months, or have them on and off visit your team, but they're responsible for developing a tiny component of this project. And what does this, how does help? This helps is, first of all, the client will gradually have a more realistic expectation of what can be done. This also helps your team as a tech provider to understand the broader process within the client's team, and also get familiarized with the client's innovative thinking. So, for example, you learn how they solve problems, and you can bring in that methodology in your solution. So I think that's a solution. And another thing is, within the AI Academy, we have this week of product scoping AI solutions. So that's a interactive workshop. You sit down with the client and they actually hands-on help develop, identify a problem and develop a high-level solution for this. So this is something that the salespeople can be trained for, to conduct these short workshops hands-on with the client and scope the project in a more meaningful way and come up with a tangible solution. And I know some companies do this, but I don't think there are systematic ways out there that are established as AI solutions or problem discovery workshop. So I think this can also help reduce the risk that you mentioned.
What are some areas right now that you're self-teaching yourself? You talked a lot about the self-initiative to go and learn new things and constantly stay on the cutting edge. What are the hobby areas? What are you looking at right now?
So uh, some of the engagements I have right now is I work with companies that already have established, let's say, a center of excellence for AI. So they've had various siloed AI initiatives in the past, digital transformation of various departments, and they've realized that they need to have a more centric approach to this. And a lot of it has to do with coming up with a set of standards in terms of your architecture, your IoT ecosystem, and also your data. And whatever they do, they want to do it within that accepted, like, enterprise level architecture and set of standards. Because of that, I was actually forced to go and read about this. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Open Group Architecture Framework. It's an industrial forum, and they have different certificates and classes about architecture and data standards, security. It's a big organization right now. But I've started reading their content and trying to educate myself on how they build and enforce. I mean, it's not an enforcement agency, but they roll out these standards and architecture frameworks. That's what I've been trying to learn in the past couple of months. Yeah.
What's really drawn me to your story as a project manager is every time I talk to you over the last year and a half, is there's always something new that you're teaching yourself. And this sense of continued learning really kind of ties in well with the mission of Elevated. And so, I very much want to thank you for sharing that story with us. One thing I did want to note is some of the courses that we have for continuous learning. We have a tremendous uh, project management, 80-hour advanced project management course that we do here at Caltech CTME, but we have a lot of new AI and ML courses. One of them is a 40-hour AI ML for engineering and sciences. So a lot of, Cyrus, what you've talked about, how do we have these use case driven science and engineering challenges? How do we still maintain the integrity of the scientific method, which is the machine learning lifecycle? How do we develop algorithms? How do we use generative AI and computer vision? But mainly with a bent on IoT sensors, anomaly detection, health diagnostics, everything in the science and engineering space. That course, which is in its third iteration, will kick off January 25th in the new year. But our newest course, which I'm most excited about, is our prototyping AI course. And what this is it's this paradigm shift, and Cyrus, you know this very well, of data science and machine learning engineer to AI engineer, and what that means for your organization. So this is a very hands-on, where the rubber meets the road, allowing you to have UI and UX characteristics to actually deploy, to prototype these AI solutions. We have an AI literacy course that's 12 hours that's going to drop in January, as well as we have our eyes on those international teams, specifically looking at European Union countries that need to implement the AI Act, specifically in early February next year. And finally, we have a customized program for an innovation lab that allows companies to come onto Caltech campus for a week to get lectures from industry experts, from professors working on cutting edge AI, but at the same time, develop your roadmap and your strategy so you can execute when you get back. So Cyrus, I couldn't be more happy to bring you onto the show. Thank you so much for joining. Everybody, this recording will be available by the end of today, and we'll send it to your inboxes so you can rewatch it if you missed any of the conversation. Cyrus, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nick.
All right, bye.
Thank you.